Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Mark and I thank you so much for coming by today. Well, today's video is all about ballpoint pens and why no one takes them seriously. Well, I'm going to use this recycled envelope that I literally just pulled out of my recycle bin, and I'm going to use these two cheapo ballpoint pens to start off this discussion. These are just really cheap pens that I've had kicking around for a while. I'm not even sure where I got this one from. It's just a pen that I've had in my junk drawer for a while. And this green one here I got from a local bank. They give them away. Really cheap pens. It's a click pen, so you got the spring inside and all that. And I just want to pull these apart so we can start talking about the pen from the inside and what these things are and how they work. Basically, ballpoint pens are very simple. They're gravity feed, meaning when you draw with them or you write with them, the ink pulls down through the ball and rolls out onto the page or whatever the surface is. And it's a gravity feed, so the more you use it, the more ink is pulled down. Now, that's point down, when you put the point down to the paper and you write with it. If you were to turn the pen the other way and put it in your pocket, the heat from your body or over time would cause the ink to actually go the other way, which is what we call an exploded pen in your pocket. And I remember many times when I was a young kid in middle school having that pen explode in my pocket and having that big stain, ruin a good pair of pants, and my mom wasn't too happy, especially when they go through the laundry. But anyway, these cheap pens here, as I'm showing you with this thing, this one's got a grip on it. They're really cheaply made. There's nothing fancy about them. This one here has the spring inside to keep, it's for the click, the click button on the bottom so you can click it up and down. They both do the exact same thing, but again, they're very cheap pens, nothing to rave about, and this hard plastic is sometimes uncomfortable to write with, especially if you're writing a lot. You don't want to use something that's too hard. That's why I like that rubbery tip on the other pen a little bit better. But these are just really cheap. The flanges there, that's what catches on the spring and keeps the spring from sliding all the way down the pen body. But the shell of these pens, this one, like I said, is just really cheap hard plastic. This one's a little more flexible, and they just fit right into the bodies. This one slides in, and it's a tight fit, so it stays in place. These are great for what they do. If you're just going someplace to write a check or just to write some notes in a notebook or something, they're perfect. The thing with ballpoint pens is they only have a single line width. So if you're drawing with a micron pen or a multi-liner or something like that, you can actually press down and get a little bit of a different line width. And combining that with pressure, you're going to get different line widths and you're going to be able to control it better. Ballpoint pens, however, have a single line width, and if you were to just write a straight line, it's always going to be that size no matter what. The cool thing about ballpoint pens, and this is what I loved when I was growing up, I used ballpoint pens all the time as a kid. That was my go-to tool when I was in school. You're taking notes, and I would always draw, little doodles in the sidebar. The cool thing is you can get neat gradations and neat feathering with ballpoint pens, because it's not about the line width or the pressure necessarily on the page with the pen. It's the pressure you use actually lifting off the page with the pen. So that's what this discussion is about in part as well, is how to use a ballpoint pen. Because when you're drawing with a ballpoint pen, it's kind of weird at first. It's not really fun. It's you just kind of just drawing these straight lines, and there's really no depth and everything, so you kind of have to go back over lines to make them thicker or to get any kind of difference between the line widths. Here I'm just applying a little rubbing alcohol so you can see that the ink breaks down. It's not permanent. If I kept scrubbing at this, I would eventually kind of wear a lot of that ink off. But it holds up well. These cheap pens hold up well even under alcohol. Water would be a little less effective, but you can see that even in the finer Copic markers or things like that, the alcohol-based markers, they accelerate the ink and allow you to do a lot more with it. So if you were to do a ballpoint pen drawing and then apply alcohol later, you could get some interesting effects with it. I'm not going to do that today. That's a whole other discussion, but I just wanted to tap into that real quick and just show you that here. So now I'm going to take a look at these two different Inkjoy pens from, Paper Mate. And The thing with these is I was sent these pens. They were given to me to review, and I don't want to do a review of these pens. I'm not interested in doing a review for them. However, I do want to show them in comparison to each other, because those cheap pens that I showed you, one had a sturdy body that was a solid body, the other one was a click pen. These are the same thing. The Paper Mate Inkjoys have the sturdy body, and they also have the click pen. And they do exactly the same thing as the cheaper pens do. There's no difference in them. The one thing I will point out is I love these little tips right here. These are my favorite. I just love popping them off. I have a good time with that. Small thrills, I'm sure. But you can see there's a difference in the tip of these two pens. One, they're both a little bit similar to the other two cheap pens, but one, the sturdy body, the firm single body, has a thinner tip than the click body, and that may just be because of the design. I'm not sure, but it's the same gravity feed. It's the same tube structure of the inkwell, and this one has the click body has the rubber grip at the tip, which is nice. Both of these are very nice pens, and if I were to give any kind of review, I would just simply say they're good for writing, and if you like to draw with ballpoint pens, they're good for that too. So there's really no review of that. There's some other pens I'm going to talk about in just a minute, but as far as these ballpoint pens go, these Inkjoys, they're pretty much the same as any other pen as far as what they do. However, these are a little bit higher quality, and that I think has to do more with the ink inside, and that's what I want to talk about next, is the ink. So those two cheap pens that I used in the earlier part of this, you could see that they were just very stiff lines, whatever, and really not much to do with them. They're cheap pens. The Inkjoys, however, have a lot more, just a darker pigment, I guess. I don't know what you call it, that goes into the ink. That black is a lot stronger and has a lot more contrast against the paper. And when you're trying to feather it like I'm doing or gradate it, again, pulling off the paper, the ink comes out a lot heavier in these pens too. So when you're writing, say you're writing a letter, these are great for that. When I drop some alcohol on it, you can see very quickly the ink changes. Not only does it bleed out a lot more, because there's a lot more ink coming out of these pens, but it also changes color. You can see on the end of this Q-tip here, the ink actually turns a purplish color, which I thought is really cool actually, because it's nice to know that it's not a pure black. However, if you're going for a pure black, that might be something you might want to take a look at. But you can see here just the difference between these two pens. Now let's talk about colored pens. I have some Paper Mate Inkjoys that I was sent, and I went out and I bought these Bic pens just because I was curious to see the difference. They're both firm body, meaning they have that single shell with the insert that goes in. There's no click buttons or anything. But I don't use colored ballpoint pens. When I was teaching and I had to do grades, this is back a while ago when you had a grade book instead of a computer, we would use red pens and I think maybe even black, blue, or whatever. So we had the standard colored pens. These have all kinds of different colors. These are, pink. It says here they're smooth and all that. Whatever. These are made by the Newell company, which owns a lot of different products. They own the Sanford Sharpies. They own just a lot of different things. I believe Rotring is under their umbrella. But so I wanted to compare the Inkjoy black pen that I just showed you in the demonstration with this little one, this mini. These little mini pens are a curious thing for me. And as you can see, they're exactly the same. So with these little Paper Mate minis, you're going to get the same quality out of the mini that you got in the bigger one. So now we're going to get into the color. And with these mini pens, I was hoping that they were going to be really strong and bold and vibrant. And they weren't. I didn't find them to be that vibrant, that bold, that great. Were they colorful? Yes. The blues and that pink, those were the strong ones. But the worst I found was the greens. The greens are very hard. The ink does not come out. The tips are very hard to get any kind of ink flow coming out of them. You have to really put a lot of pressure on them. So then I went to the Bic ones, hoping that these were going to be a little better. And I could see on the back of the package they have that little that little seal ball on the tip of the pen, which I like. These were a little different. Again, the shell body, very hard. Wouldn't want to draw with these for a long time. They're just a little bit different from the other pens. What I like is the bottom is sealed and it's a hard seal, so the ink's not going to leak out anytime soon. If I had that in my pocket or something, or even in a hot car or something, I don't feel like the ink is going to leak out the bottom. Now that plastic thing on the tip, the seal, it has sort of a gummy feel to these pens, so it was kind of hard to get these off, and I had to do it for every pen. You actually have to draw through it a little bit to get it to the ink to flow properly. It's the same typical gravity feed body and nothing different than any other ballpoint pen I've used, but I did notice that the ink flow was a little bit stronger than the other pens. So the Bic pens, to me, had a little bit stronger of a flow than the Paper Mate Minis and the Paper Mate Inkjoy pens. Both are fine for doodling and drawing and writing, so I had no problem with it that way. But again, once I got to the green pen, that's when, again, it flopped. And this, to me, was just not fun to use with those green pens. The light blues were okay. They were just, they were just okay. There was nothing strong about it. The reds were all right. I had no problem with the reds, but those greens, I would never use them because they would just drive me crazy. You can see here I'm putting a lot of pressure down, almost going through the page because I'm putting so much pressure on it. Let's talk about this and more right after this coffee break. So after seeing how these colored pens work, I'm not thrilled by them. It's not something I would ever go out and buy purposefully. I did buy these for the video. They were cheap. They were just a couple of dollars. So it wasn't like I broke the bank buying them. And they'll be fun to have around, and I'm glad I have them, but they're not something that I'm going to use regularly. The black pens, the black Inkjoy pens, I really like those, but I'll use those more for writing and taking notes and bringing to work or giving to my kids or something. For drawing, they're fun to use, and I'll probably use them at some point, but I like my regular tools a little better than ballpoint pens. But it comes down to, why do people not take ballpoint pens seriously? Why is there no, strong allegiance to ballpoint pens? Everyone goes out and buys micron pens. Everyone goes out and buys reprographic pens or dip pens or all these other pens, but there's not a lot of love for ballpoint pens. For me, my love came when I was in middle school, and that's all we had. When I was in high school, all I drew was with a ballpoint pen because it was accessible, it was cheap, I could get them anywhere, whether at home, in the main office of the school, I could just ask for a pen or a teacher. So they were accessible and easy to use. But I think people don't like them because, one, they're cheap, and two, they're really inconsistent. The ink flow is not consistent, the ink quality is not consistent, and you're getting pretty much a cheap product that does mostly one thing. You can see that little glob in the left side of the mouth there. That's what I always hated about ballpoint pens, is that I learned that you have to have a dabbing area, meaning someplace to wipe off the excess that comes out of the ballpoint pen. One thing you have to do also is, like watercolor, you have to plan your highlights, and a lot of people don't like doing that, especially when drawing. I like ballpoint pens so much because it's a layering process. As you can see here, I'm cross-hatching and cross-hatching over and over. The darker areas are built up, while the lighter areas you can leave light. Using this pink pen on the red just gives a little bit more of a bump, and then using a dark brown pen sort of brings out the shadow areas a little better. It's not black, it's a brown, so there's some red in the ink already, which is nice, almost like a dark walnut or something. But when it comes to the other areas, shadowing is usually best done when you have a darker version of a color. So if you have red, if you have a darker red, it helps because you can then create your shadows. Typically, though, you don't have a dark red with ballpoint pens. You have one color. You have blue, light blue, red, green, and stuff like that. So you're stuck with these one colors. I just happen to have the brown pen, so that worked, and the two blues work good together because they have a light and a dark blue. But for this jacket, I have the brown pen again. This is the brown Mini, and I'm just going to do hard outlines, so I'm getting a consistent line. But you can see that with the ballpoint pen, the line quality is not consistent because that the ballpoint just creates like a goopy end, and you have to constantly wipe it off, which can be kind of a pain. It's kind of like people feel with dip pens, where you have to constantly dip the pen over and over. That's not a problem for me, and I actually don't mind dabbing off these ballpoint pens. It's just it can be a pain sometimes if you forget, and then you get a globby area. And if you're not careful, you can smear the ballpoint because the ink sometimes can take a while to dry. It's not super wet, but you can have a globby end and your hand can go smearing right across it. So what I do is I usually put a piece of paper over areas that are still wet just to protect them from smearing. But here you can see I'm planning my highlights. I'm shading by lifting off the page instead of pushing down on the pen. I'm creating a lighter pressure with something I would call feathering. Now there's a lot of other videos and tutorials on how to use ballpoint pens. I'm not going to get into how to use them. I just wanted to talk about why people don't take them seriously. Why are there no real big ballpoint pen artists that we know of? Why does everybody flock out and buy Micron pens or Copic multiliners and not ballpoint pens? Because they're cheap. The ink is cheap, the pens are cheap, they're made cheaply, but the results you can get are fabulous. And I had a lot of fun doing this drawing, and I thank you so much for watching. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. And if you want to try ballpoint pens, they're accessible and they're not too expensive. I say go out and get some, check them out for yourself, have fun, and thank you for watching. God bless.